It's a long, hot Saturday afternoon. We've had 4 catches dropped off our bowling, and our captain, who was meant to be driving us home, stormed off in a huff after the second ball of the match. Left with no option, honest, but to have a few more rounds in the clubhouse. This is the Guerilla Cricket Podcast.
Cricket. This is all about cricket. Guerilla cricket. Not just runs and wickets. So come and get it. Guerilla Cricket Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Guerilla Cricket Podcast. We're recording on Saturday, the 9th of May 2020, 43 years to the day since news of Kerry Packer's revolutionary World Series cricket was first made public. And almost as seismically, almost 2 years to the day since Guerilla Cricket began broadcasting exclusive coverage of Ireland's first ever men's test, live from Malahide. And it's in the spirit of reminiscence that we convene today. Thank you for all your lovely feedback on the first edition of Guerilla Origin Stories that we did a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Katie Scott, Jules Farman and Roger McCann. We enjoyed it too, so we're making it a thing. I'm your host, Nakul Pande, and for episode 2 of Guerilla Origin Stories, I'm joined by 3 more friends and contributors. First up, someone who knows Devon is a place on earth, the founder and editor of County Cricket Matters, Annie CHAVE.
Hello.
Joining us in voice and face on an international match day at Lord's, he's there to let the ground staff in. It's the boogie-woogie baker boy of East Putternee, Gary Naylor.
Hello.
And completing the crew, he's the intersection of the Southwest England, Southwest London Venn diagram that is our panel today. Stuck in the middle, it's you, Paul Grubby Howarth.
Hello, Nakul. Hello, Annie. Hello, Gaz. Hello, everyone out there.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Before we begin, I will close the show by telling you why we're raising money, but we're raising money for our friends at the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. The link to the Just Giving page for that is on our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram pages, and in the show notes for this episode. So go help them out. You'll also be supporting the continued existence of Guerilla Cricket. Thank you. And on to the fun stuff. Let's go right back to the cricketing beginning. Starting with you, Annie, what is your first cricketing memory?
My first cricketing memory is probably when I was about 8. I lived in Exeter, and at the top of my road was the county ground. And I remember going up to the top of the road in my little shorts, climbing up the massive Great Hill, which was probably tiny, and looking over into the ground and seeing these incredible looking men, massive guys, Joel Garner and Viv Richards, playing at the top of my road, and absolutely, completely fell in love. That is my first memory. I hadn't a clue how well they were playing or anything about them, just that they looked so awesome.
It's a hell of an early brush with cricketing royalty. Gary, your first introduction to cricket?
Well, I was also 8 years old, and but rather different circumstances. I was sitting in the smoky living room of my grandparents, and it was August in 1971, and a very famous match, actually. Lancashire were playing the semi-final of the Gillette Cup against Gloucestershire. And the match, there'd been a rain delay in the afternoon, and the match was going on in the dark. Now, we were watching it on a black and white television, and probably one of the reasons I can remember it so well is that my father was probably due to take us home for bedtime stuff at around sort of 8 o'clock or something. But they were still playing at 8:45, and Lanky needed another 27 to win, I think. They had plenty of overs, but it was literally getting dark, and Dickie Bird was doing his Dickie Bird thing. But I think it was Albert Jepson, I'm not quite sure of the first name there, at the other end, and he told them to bloody well get on with it and do it. And David Hughes came in. He was a rather unsung bowler who bats, making his way in the Lancashire team, who were just acquiring a kind of sense of togetherness, which led them to be called the one-day kings at a later stage. But he hit 24 in an over, which was just a kind of earth-shattering experience to witness this. I mean, now it's sort of part of the course, but then nobody had seen the likes of it. And in the dark, it was John Mortimer who was the bowler, and he took him for 24, leaving just a single that Jackie Bond, who was at the other end, hit to win the match. And our team, Lanky, got over the line and subsequently went to Lords and played another very famous match in which Ashley Thickbow almost got Kent there, but the aforementioned skipper, Captain Fantastic Jackie Bond, the Methodist minister, pulled off an extraordinary catch. So it was really that late summer of 1971, in particular, David Hughes' innings, witnessed on a black and white television in the smoky living room of my grandparents.
Another game that's gone down in cricketing folklore, that Lancashire team of the 70s with Clive Lloyd, with Farouk Engineer, captained by Jack Bond. Grubby, your earliest cricketing memories?
Well, funny enough, I was also 8, so it's obviously the age at which one is formed from a cricketing point of view.
You actually went to a right, you get to 7. Already the bad.
Yeah, well, I can't be 100% sure, but I think I was 8 years old. So, as I think you mentioned there, I grew up in South Devon, so not too far away from where Annie still is. But I was in a little place called High Week, which is in Newton Abbot, which is a market town in South Devon. And I lived at 45 Castlewood Avenue. And the road, as you came out of my house and looked up to your left, it sloped up. And halfway up this hill was a green. Like a village green with a couple of conker trees that we used to get in trouble for throwing sticks into and all that sort of stuff. And it was a beautiful sunny day, as it is, I think, wherever you are at the moment, much like today. And I happened to be, I don't know, I got involved in this game with a lot of older boys, some as old as 12, I believe. And what we would do is we'd bowl down the hill. And so if you're batting sort of up the hill, if you like, on this very sloping green. I think my dad had come to retrieve me because it was tea time or something. And just before I had to go in, pulling stumps on the game, I was fielding it sort of mid-on, if you like. And this kid, one of the bigger boys, smashed the ball, went high over my head. I turned and watched it come down from over my shoulder, dived, one-handed, left-handed, and pouched this tennis ball. And now, I'd love to say that was the start of the revelation of my genius on the cricket pitch. It was. I mean, I was an all right young sports person, I suppose, but it was probably a little bit of a fluke. But these kids, these 11 and 12-year-old kids, who, bearing in mind I was slightly in awe of, just couldn't believe what they'd witnessed. So I think I'd been dimly aware of cricket being on the TV. My dad's a big sports fan overall, so I probably was dimly aware of it. But that moment really sticks in my mind. And then not long after that was the famous 81 series, which I'm sure we'll return to in a little while. But that would be my first cricketing memory.
I can make it, a 4 from 4 of 8 years old being the first serious exposure to cricket. In my case, it was the 99 World Cup. And I told this story last time on Guerilla Origin Stories. My parents had just got Sky, and that tournament was split across the BBC and Sky. So we had the option of watching every single game of it. And I don't know what it is about being that age where just you are at the perfect intersection of being very impressionable. So everyone is larger than life, as you say. Annie, you talked about Joel Garner and who are both pretty larger than life figures. Joel Garner's case physically, but everyone who is an in-person or an on TV hero stands that much bigger. But also, you're old enough to actually remember it. Like there was definitely cricket on in my house before that. My dad tells a story about he bought a bat from the Lord's shop in 1996, which I ended up using through my early cricketing years, and he bought a TV for the 96 World Cup. I don't remember it, but I don't know if there's something about that age, and this is something that our guest last time talked about. So we've had Gary, you're talking about watching the 1971 Gillette Cup final on TV. When was your first game actually in the ground in person?
Yeah, so almost as far back as I can recall, my dad would take me to Goodison, and we'd go in at 3/4 time when they opened the gates to let people out who wanted to avoid the traffic. And I would go and stand on a box by the wall there in the paddock, and that was from the age of 5 or 6, I think. And we would often stop off then early both in late season and early season. We'd stop off at Wadham Road at Bootle to see the last hour and of the club cricket Liverpool competition, as it was then. We'd also go to Crosby, to Northern, and we'd see the last hour there, often on a Saturday night. But that was club cricket. But my first exposure to first class cricket was quite a match, actually. I know I've talked about this before, so I won't labour it too much. But again, with my father, we went on Saturday to Egbert, to the annual match that Lancashire always played there, and it was August 1975, so I'd just turned 12 then. And I'll just read out some of the names that I saw there on the Saturday. I saw Barry Richards make 4, Gordon Greenidge make 48. I saw Andy Roberts get 13. I saw Peter Lever and Peter Lee opening the bowling for Lanky, and Barry Wood and the aforementioned David Hughes later. And then that was Hampshire all out for 160. And then saw Lancashire bat, and Lancashire collapsed after a good start. David Lloyd made 96. But they were all out 163, largely due to the searing pace of Andy Roberts, who took 5 for 33 and frightened the life out of the batsman and frightened the life out of the 12-year-old me. Well, I had to go back, didn't I, on the Monday and Tuesday, and then I was going by myself. Of course, my father would be at work as a panel beater. So I got on the bus at Seaforth and went to the end of the line, which was Egbert, the other end of the Mersey estuary. And I then saw Barry Richards make 103 and Gordon Greenidge make 60. Big Clive was bowling, and when Lancashire replied, they fell short of their target of 344, but I did see Clive Lloyd make 112. Farouk Engineer was also playing in that match. Just extraordinary when you think that was county cricket back then. So I saw sort of all 3 days. Lancashire didn't win, but boy, did cricket win me over. At Egbert, Barry Richards, Gordon Greenidge, Andy Roberts, Clive Lloyd, David Lloyd, Frank Hayes, Farouk Engineer, even Big Bernard Reedy. So that was the first class match that I saw, and I'm afraid I've been hopelessly devoted to you cricket since then.
I've talked a few times on this show about how I wish that county cricket would go back to the days of 2 overseas players, because even going into the time that I first fell in love with cricket in the 90s and early 2000s, you still had 2 overseas players and a huge concentration of talent. We talked about a number of the West Indian greats. Gary, actually, just before we move on to Paul and Annie talking about this, at that time, Lancashire League and club cricket would have had its fair share of pretty good players as well. Was there anyone who was knocking around the Liverpool and Lancashire leagues at the time that you were growing up?
No, it was before club cricket was reorganised into a kind of elite set of leagues, and the Liverpool competition was slightly below the standard of the Lancashire leagues, where traditionally Big Clive came over. I think he played for Haslingden, and Michael Holding did as well. They would have West Indian pros and sometimes Pakistani pros playing in that league. In the Liverpool competition, I think everyone was allowed 1 pro, but they tended to be local. They tended to be either sort of Cheshire League players. So I think Ian Cobain was on his way up. At that point, he would play as a pro. Hightown, the team that I played for, had another sort of Lancashire seconds player, I think, as their pro. But it didn't have the glamour of the kind of test stars. I think Franklin Stevenson and people like that played Lancashire League. But Liverpool competition was just a notch below that then. And then when the reorganisation came in the 90s, they became one of the kind of elite feeder competitions. And then they did, with more sponsorship and more money, then they did begin to attract the kind of pros that one associates with the Lancashire leagues. I think it was a long time at Southport. There was an Indian bowler, played a few tests. Kulkarni, is it? I can't remember his exact name.
Nilesh Kulkarni, left arm spinner.
I think he was a pacer, so maybe I'm misremembering the name there. But anyway, he was at Southport, I know, for a while. But no, it wasn't. We weren't quite that level, but we did have the most beautiful grounds and the most beautiful pitches, because these were all built at the height of Liverpool's Victorian power. So these pavilions were built in the 1870s, 1880s, and the sports grounds had all that kind of Victorian muscular Christianity, where there were crown green bowling greens, there were cricket grounds, there were hockey pitches, there were tennis courts around them, the likes of Nest and Oxton, Chester Boughton Hall. And I was a kid, I was playing on these grounds at 15 and 16. I thought all life was like that. Well, I was disabused of it a little later. But what a joy to have been a teenage cricket player in Liverpool in the late 70s.
Let's shuffle down the West Coast. Grubby, you talked about your early introduction to cricket being impressing the bigger boys on the village green, but your first game of quote unquote real cricket live and on TV.
Well, the first I was doing a bit of research on the hoof just then, because the first actual game I went to was a county championship match between Somerset and Glamorgan at Taunton, which felt just like such a massive adventure of a day out, travelling from Newton Abbot to Taunton with a school friend, and his dad drove us, and it was a blistering hot day. I think I'm right in saying, I think I've tracked it down. It was towards the end of July 1984, so I would have been 12 years old, and just the thing that sticks in my mind is how sweltering a day it was. And B, I always remember having a chat with future England bowler Greg Thomas on the boundary, whose first name is actually John. I wonder why he uses Greg as a middle name. But anyway, JG Thomas was on the boundary at long leg and turning around signing a few autographs. Not for me, I didn't do autograph hunting. The only autograph I ever got in my childhood was John Noakes, but that's a different story. Anyway, so Greg Thomas is there, and we're just sort of chatting away. Oh, how's it going? And he just stood there, he just bowling over, and he was dripping sweat, and he just went, hot enough for you, was it? And I just thought how lovely to have access to these top level sports stars. Can you imagine trying to have a conversation with, I don't know, Glenn Hoddle, or in my case, Eric Gates at Ipswich Town, in the middle of a game, which you can obviously do in cricket. So I remember that. I was just looking at the lineups that day, actually, because I'd long since forgotten. But Somerset, I think, well, Somerset were obviously batting at the time. It was one of those, shall we say, one of those batting-friendly pitches that you used to get routinely at Somerset. So it looks like Glamorgan had declared 357 for 7, 353 for 7. So I must have been watching Somerset's innings, which ended up 308 for 8 declared. But I'll just read you the top 6 or 7 of Somerset. It was Felton, Roebuck, Popplewell, Crowe. We're into the Crowe era. And Crowe bowled, actually, quite a bit in this match, it seems. Brian Rose, Lloyds, your mate Vic Marks, Annie, Palmer, Davis, Turner. Just, some great names there. Javid Miandad was playing for Glamorgan at the time. In fact, I see he scored 83. So, yeah, that would be my first sort of proper game. But harking back to, I suppose, my first memory and all that being tied in, bear in mind, 1981, which may have been the year of what I like to call the green catch, if I hadn't quite turned 9 at that point. Ipswich were really, my football team, Ipswich, were the best team in the land at that point. We'd won the UEFA Cup, beating St Etienne along the way and all that sort of stuff. So I was coming off the back of that. Then it was the Ashes in 81. And I just remember playing outside, not actually watching the game, not listening on the radio, playing outside. I think when Botham scored his 149 at Headingley, I'd probably, if I had been paying attention, I'd probably abandoned it, as I'd abandoned all hope. And I remember that my old man got home from work, stopped his car at the top of the drive to open the gate so he could drive in, opened the door, and I heard on the radio, Botham's, and he said, Botham's got a century. And I, 9-year-old me, I just went, bloody hell. I just remember saying it and being forgiven because it was something so amazing.
If ever there was a circumstance to forgive a child for mild swearing, Botham's heroics at Headingley were very much it. Annie, so you talked about catching sight of the legends Viv and Joel in the well, I say glory days. Certainly possibly the most fun days that Somerset have ever had. Don't want to labour the point. Obviously, glory is a relative term if you're a Somerset fan. But your first sort of games that you can pinpoint watching live and on TV, and this could even be club cricket, because I know you've been your life has been sort of suffused with particularly Southwest England club cricket.
My background is very, very much friendly cricket and club cricket. So my whole summer, my whole childhood summers were completely watching my dad's team play. So I think we kind of there were six of us in my family, all off to go and watch dad play basically every weekend. So I saw very, very little county cricket when I was little. Dad would have just been playing instead of watching. So I don't have those early memories. I did see Viv and Joel and both of them play. And then when I went to university, I watched both of them play with Hick at Worcester. So I had a lot of later, but early on, very, very much just running around in the fields, watching my dad play and scoring and things like that. The first game I remember on telly is, of course, as we just talked about, the Headingley test with both of them. We didn't have a television until I was 14, so didn't have that endless watching of cricket early on either. But we managed somehow to get to see the end of the Headingley test and both of them, and of course Willis do their magic. So I think that was very much, it was all tied in. Somerset was supreme. Always checking out the paper, trying to see what was going on. But I have very little early memories of Somerset. But I certainly thought both of them, Richards and Garner, were just the best things ever in the whole wide world, as I do now think of Trescothick in that way.
Just chip in a moment there, because memories of Big Joel. I remember walking past Big Joel on the at the nursery ground at Lord's. It was 1984 test on the Saturday. We were there in the lower Edridge stand. We couldn't see very much, but it must have gone out the back there. And Big Joel was listed, I think, at 6'8". But what people forget about Big Joel is that he was actually in real life 7'2", because he had 6 inches of afro on top of that enormous expressive head of his. And he looked like a man from Mars. He just looked like a different species altogether. And I remember, then I was 18, 21. So I'd be, 6'1" as I am now. I remember just sort of gazing up, and my eyes just kept going before they reached his eyes. And then the halo of afro on the top, and what a player Big Joel was. Yeah.
You try being 5'3" and meeting.
I was going to say, there's that lovely photo of you, Annie, with Joel, and you're caught sort of mid fist, like, I can't believe it looks like you're about to fist bump him, and he's not quite responded to you. But that's a lovely shot if you haven't seen that.
Staring eyeball to navel. And there's a great photo actually that Mel Farrell has posted on her Twitter today. It being 2 years pretty much since Malahide, it's Mel Farrell desperately reaching a mic into the stratosphere to try and interview Boyd Rankin on the outfield. Even her camera operator, who is quite a tall fella, Graham, is standing on tiptoes.
Just before we move off, Garner, I slightly misremembered my first game, because I had been to a game, I think the year before the one I told you about, which was a one-day game between Somerset and Surrey. It was rain affected though, but Surrey were batting first, and in the small amount of play that was possible that day, I did see a field that had both Richards and Garner, which must have been towards the end of their collective careers at Somerset. But anyway, just to see the three of them on the same park was quite something.
All not talking to Peter Roebuck.
Well,
yes.
And
Nick in the middle, or trying to placate.
I was just about to say, before the Roebuck putsch. So that's the first introductions to cricket and the first memories of watching it. And I'm keeping with watching it. We are a radio show, and we hold radio commentary very, very dear in our hearts. But the reason I'm going with televisual and in-person visual memories is because I think they're easier to pinpoint. There's something about radio, particularly when you're a young person and you're not necessarily following every single ball as closely, is that you tend to, the individual memories don't crystallize quite as well, and you tend to remember rather where you are and what you were doing while you were listening to it in the atmosphere, rather than the individual memories. And I have a few of those in terms of long car journeys, or those endless summer days that happen when you're when you're a young kid, in between the end of the very short school cricket season and the start of the of the club season. Just before we move on, I don't wonder if we have any of those that we'd have to share. Sort of not so much first memories of cricket listened to, but first, memories of atmospheres and ambiances from of cricket listening.
I'll give you a quick one. It wasn't the first, but I was never a great fan. I'm still not of Test Match Special, so it wasn't really sort of required listening. We always had the telly on in our house anyway, even if it was just a test card, we had the telly on. But I remember queuing to get on a cross-channel ferry. And at that time, you had to queue a long time to get on a cross-channel ferry. I was coming back from sort of long summers in Dordogne, and I actually played cricket a few times for Périgueux. It was very hot playing cricket for Périgueux, or in Périgueux for the local side. But we were queuing to get on a boat to come back, and it was the You Guys Are History match where Devon Malcolm ran through the South Africans, and we could get sort of Test Match Special because we were close enough to the English coast, of course, at Calais to pick it up. So we had it on the car radio with the doors open, and Malcolm was sort of running through them. And I think we weren't the only ones listening, because every time he got a wicket, you heard this kind of "way" sort of going from car to car, and the occasional sort of lorry. So that was a distinct memory of the You Guys Are History match.
Any more, Grubby?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a very specific memory. I'm going to get this wrong now, having said it, but which does feature radio very clearly. So, with all due apologies to the fact and the reality, I think it was the first day of the 1986-87 football season, during which England were in the middle of a test match against New Zealand, I'm going to say. I'm sure we can look this up really quickly. We're out in the back garden. It's that day of the year where all the ants decide to move from place to place, and you get those massive flying ants, and you start pouring a hot water kettle down these holes. And remember that day? It was that day of the year, and we're out in the concrete strip we had outside our garage, next to the lawn. I was probably mucking about, playing some sort of sport. We had the radio on, the football. I just remember thinking, this is just the best. I think Mike Gatting might have been scoring some runs at the Oval. And I just remember thinking, what could be better? We're out here in the garden, we're messing about with sport. The football season's just started, when I still cared about football. We've got the middle of the test matches on. And I just thought that was as close to heaven as I was ever likely to get.
Does this sound about right? 21st to 26th of August, 1986, New Zealand versus England at the Oval. David Gower scoring 100 for England in the first innings.
It was Gower, not Gatting.
Match drawn, seemingly with quite a lot of rain. But
well, that particular day, it was again blistering hot, and I think Ipswich were playing Notts County. I have to check that.
That's the football, Grubby. That's not important.
Yeah, but it's all woven in.
Yeah, mine is very much sort of wandering around the garden, listening to the county championships in the last sort of, I think probably for 2014 and 2016, certainly Middlesex, Yorkshire, when Somerset needed a draw, and I remember pacing around the garden.
No, let's not do this.
yeah, just endlessly doing that. Over the last few years, I've done that, listening to Somerset, and it absolutely thrilling endings. I love the BBC commentary for the championship, so I've had some wonderful days in the garden listening to that.
I do want to come on to this, so before we kind of break to talk about how you can support the show, I do want to talk about that. Annie, like you now are very much an advocate and an evangelist for the county game as it currently exists, or as it existed up till the 2019 season. But you're relatively late to following it as a matter of course and as a matter of routine. When did that start for you in terms of really becoming a kind of a diehard county championship and Somerset fan?
Actually going, or
I mean both. I mean, following it closely and starting to go regularly.
I think I've really diehard followed it since pretty much early Trescothick days. Just completely obsessed with how well he's doing, and whenever I could watch him play. So around 90, early 90s, 93 I think he started, so really very much then. But of course I was very, very hooked on Viv and Joel as well. But as a late sort of 9-10-year-old, it's not quite it doesn't hold quite the interest that I had later on.
It's often the converts who are the most zealous.
Yes.
So that's we've gone through the first cricketing memories. We've gone through the first games watched live and on TV, and we'll take a little break now. The advert you are going to hear in the short break which we are about to take is about how you can support the show, and the time at which we're taking that break is now.
Alternative cricket commentary, bringing you laughs, bringing you jingles, bringing you joy. We are Gorillas. We need your patreon.com/Guerilla Cricket.
Welcome back to the Guerilla Cricket Podcast with me, Nakul Pande. It's our second edition of Guerilla Origin Stories, and the panel this week is Annie CHAVE, Gary NAYLOR, and Paul Grubby Howarth. So it's not just about watching. It's not just about the game. It's about those memories of really being involved, and about the people and the personalities. So we'll go for first games played, and we talked a little bit about this in terms of village green memories and running around the outfield of games. But Grubby, do you remember your first kind of game of proper organised cricket?
Yeah, so I went to a comprehensive school, Coombs Head Comprehensive in Newton Abbot, and the 80s was a period where there were quite a few teachers' strikes and works to rule and that sort of thing. So throughout my 5-year career at Coombs Head, we had but one single game of cricket, which looking back was a slight source of regret. I did go and find cricket elsewhere, but and I probably had already started playing for clubs, but this one sticks in my mind because I think pretty sure it was my 15th birthday, so 25th of June 1987, and only game we were playing Torquay Grammar School, so a big rivalry there, and I scored a 50. So, I was absolutely delighted. I came back, had a birthday party with all my mates and the girl I was trying to cop off with and all the rest of it. It was, it was a halcyon days. But just because school cricket was, I mean, we played it in PE lessons and stuff like that. But as far as the games were concerned, that was the only one that we had. So yeah, that one sticks in. But apart from that, I did play for a very brief time for Newton Abbot, which is the same club, which is a squash and tennis club where I used to play as well, and I sort of wandered into the cricket team. But I had to I think one day we played this club called Winterbourne, who are based in Teignmouth, which Annie will know, and they're based at a school in Teignmouth. And the guy coaching there, we'd had this game and got roundly beaten. He said, "Would you like to come and play with us?" And I said, "That'd be great," and ended up playing with them for a number of years. And they're a pretty good outfit, and met some very good cricketers and played glorious places like Exwick and Ottery St Mary and all these places that Annie will know incredibly well. So yeah, that's me.
Do you remember when your first game of playing against grown-ups was? And I'm going to ask that same question to you, Gary, after Paul.
Ooh, crikey.
Because I think that's quite an important moment for a cricketing youth. It's I don't know if it's a sense of that that you can make for some people it'd be that they can make a go of being a cricketer at whatever level, but it's an important sort of coming of age moment.
Yeah, I mean, the standard of cricket that we were playing at Winterbourne, I mean, all right, I'm not saying it was top class, but it was good enough. You know, we had some really proper good cricketers in our team, and we played teams of a similar standard. I remember we went one day and played Wellington School on what is still probably the most glorious pitch and setting that I've ever played cricket at. So that, you know, these were half decent teams. Playing against proper grown-ups. I mean, we had a sort of a lads versus dads game in which I used to keep wicket a fair bit, but on this occasion I was standing at gully, which I never fielded at really. And the chap who was our coach, he was a half decent bat, a bit of a nuggety opener, fancied himself a bit as a cricketer. Slashed at one. He was quite a doughty player, so I think he was taking a bit of a risk, and it flew to me just above my head, and I took this catch, and he gave me a look as he walked off. But you know, but that's really the only game I can remember playing against adults through that period. But I didn't. It never because we weren't in a club that had kind of age groups and then the first team, if you like. It was very much a contained. You know, we probably had 3 or 4 teams, but they were all sort of under 16, under 17 teams. So it was never a kind of a progression point in the same way it might be at other clubs, I suppose.
Gary, was it the same situation for you, or was it a different thing? Like, do you remember, well, first game of organised cricket playing, and then kind of a graduation point to playing not just with kids your own age, but with grown-ups?
Not absolutely clearly, but I can remember a few incidents. I definitely played some cricket for my primary school against other primary schools, because we played at Brook Vale where there were lots of football pitches, but there was one kind of concrete strip of 22 yards, and we played with spring-loaded stumps, you know, and pimple gloves and Slazenger cricket bats and so on. So it was an organised game, but it wasn't a proper game. But from about the age of 14, I think I was probably playing adult cricket at 14. I was definitely playing it at 15. For Hightown, and at 16 I think I was playing for the second team, which meant that we played at the alternate square, the alternate main grounds, because most grounds Liverpool competition had at least 2 grounds, and the first would be, or the seconds would be on the first ground, the best one, the prime one, and the thirds, fourths, fifths and so on would be on the secondary or tertiary ground. So it was a big thing for me was playing on the main squares, and I remember playing at Liverpool on the same wicket that Lancashire had played Nottinghamshire in, I think, 1981, might have been maybe 1980. Anyway, Richard Hadley had taken 7 wickets, and I could still see his kind of footsteps at the end where I was running into bowl. And suffice to say, I did not take 7 wickets against Liverpool Cricket Club playing for Hightown on a wicket that was like concrete. But I also played, you know, at Southport and Birkdale, where I'd seen Lancashire play Middlesex on Charles and Di's wedding anniversary, and they ran out of beer at 2:00. And you know, I was very lucky to play on some of these fantastic grounds. And I played a lot when I was a kid. You know, I played Saturdays for Hightown. I played Sundays for a Sunday team called Litherland Methodists, who drank much more than they should drink. And I played age group cricket on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I was playing a lot. But I have one memory that might amuse when I was waiting for my lift from one of our players, who was one of the sort of older players in the side, and he said, well, I'll pick you up, and you know, we're going to play at Neston, or we're going to play at Chester or Birkenhead Park or something. And I got to the bus stop at the top of the road where I was living, and the next door neighbours were there, and you know, you do make awkward conversation as you do when you're sort of 15-year-old or something. And they said they were waiting for the bus. I said, oh, I'm waiting for a lift due here any minute. And sure enough, my lift did turn up in a Jaguar XJS car, which was about as glamorous as it was possible to be in the late 70s. And I said, oh, here's my lift. So maybe see you tomorrow. And got into this silver Jaguar XJS car and zoomed off past the docks of Liverpool and onto my cricket match. So that was quite a strong memory of those days.
Chauffeur-driven glory. Annie, did you ever make the transition from being heavily involved on the non-playing side to playing, and when was that transition?
Yeah, I have a very life is very different for women now, women cricketers now, than when I was growing up. My first memory of a game was again at the top of my road at the Devon County ground, which was Exeter Colts. I remember I followed my brother around a lot. He was a couple of years older than me. I went up to the top of the hill with him. He was probably about 11 and I was probably about 9. And I had short hair and I joined in. I wanted to play cricket as well. And I remember playing and at the end being told to go home because I was a girl. And I was never allowed to go up there again. So that was one of my first memories of trying to play a game. I wasn't, I didn't really, I'd played so much in the garden, I knew what I was doing and I could bowl, but I was a girl. Therefore, I was sent away. I think I remember feeling very guilty for pretending to be something I wasn't as well, which is a very weird thing. But from that, I played for my dad's team occasionally when they were short. So we had women playing from an early time, from the late 70s, 80s. So there were women playing, and very occasionally I'd play a little bit if they needed someone. And then in my late 20s, I joined Gunsbury Ladies when I lived in London, and played very briefly. But by then, I'd kind of, cricket is a very unnatural game to learn at a later stage, and bowling and batting is something that doesn't come naturally at that age. So I wasn't very good, but I did. My claim to fame is that I did get Charlotte Edwards out, and so probably caught on the boundary. Very good catch, but I got her out.
Fell into your trap.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
You're absolutely right. Cricket was different then, and I'm glad it's changed so much. But I think I must have had a couple of formative experiences where girls had joined in games, and I remember once telling one that the ball is hard, and said, yeah, it's hard, but it'll be all right, won't it? And I think sort of immediately fielded a ball and dislocated a finger and stuff like this. And it used to really worry. It worried me just as much when it was boys, but with boys, at least, I had an idea that they would have played with a hard ball at school, where no girls at any school that I ever had any contact with played with it. And it was a kind of bravura kind of, I'll join in, without knowing that ball, even when it's traveling at a relatively slow speed, unless you know what you're doing, it's gonna really hurt. And I think there was a couple of injuries of that kind, ball bobbling off an outfield and hitting somebody in the face and stuff like this. And I've caused one or two myself, but I've seen so many injuries on a cricket field that I always get wary of anybody, no matter who it is, joining in for a game of pickup cricket if they don't know how hard that ball is.
Well, I did, because I
spent
my childhood playing with my brothers in the garden. So I did, but it wasn't an option. It very much wasn't an option at that point. Certainly not in Exeter, But any cricket that you did play, it was definitely with men or boys, because there weren't available teams to me at that point.
Can I ask? Sorry, Nakul, I know you're looking for time, but can I ask what I felt was a really important thing about women's cricket? I remember playing, I think, at the Bank of England ground. This would be in the 90s when I was playing for Putney, and there was a women's match going on, and at that point they were still wearing kick pleat skirts, and it just didn't look like an athletic pursuit. And I was working in fashion at the time, so I knew a bit about the garments and everything else. But the change came when the kit started to become the same as cricketers, with the trousers. It also became so much more athletic, and it seemed so much more like an athletic pursuit rather than with the kick pleat skirts. It just didn't look right to me. Now, that may be just a kind of aesthetic thing, but I think it made a big difference when women's cricket started to get away from the kind of kick pleats and the hockey sticks and look like cricketers.
I think it was probably all of those factors coming together at the same time. I mean, when you mentioned Charlotte Edwards there, your bunny, Annie,
My bunny, yeah.
But she had a long and splendid career, of course, for England. But when she started, I believe it was still the skirts and not the trousers, wasn't it?
Yeah,
so,
and there's a reason men don't play with wearing shorts.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a crazy thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a few experiments with playing in shorts. There's one in Australian, the equivalent of the One Day Cup in the 90s, but rapidly shelved. But yeah, Charlotte Edwards in the late 1990s, playing Test cricket in shorts. The ICC took over women's cricket in the early 2000s, and while there are things such as the fact that for largely financial reasons, women's Test cricket is really restricted to England and Australia these days, and even then irregularly. It's certainly the case that the ICC have thrown away some of the old paternalistic conventions about women's cricket and have treated them like cricketers, which is to everybody's benefit. I have a more inglorious, in a way inglorious, but claim to fame in terms of playing against a female cricketer. The biggest six I've ever been hit for was by Claire Taylor. I think in the days she was playing for England, they may have just become double world champions in that year. It was we played a warm-up pre-season friendly against Yorkshire women, and Claire Taylor got roped in by a colleague of hers who was playing for Yorkshire, and tossed up a googly just outside off stump, and my God, that ball went miles.
So much to unpick, Nakul, about that first sentence of the biggest six I've ever been hit for. Indicating that you could have picked from a number of sixes for which you've been hit.
Being a wrist spinner is not easy.
It goes with the territory. Yeah,
it does. Yeah, we mentioned a few giants of the game who were around when you guys were first getting involved with cricket. So I'm going to ask sort of two related questions to each of you, just very quickly before we wrap up. Paul, first cricketing hero and sort of greatest or longest lasting or most impactful cricketing hero.
Oh God, so many to choose from. David Gower is my favourite batsman of all time. Like many watchers of cricket of that time, just that moment when he came in, and in my mind's eye, it was always a slightly overcast day. England would be in a little bit of trouble. Gower would come in, probably hit his first ball through the covers for four, clip the second one off his legs for four, and not long afterwards, nick one behind the second slip for a beautiful 20 or whatever it was. Now, of course, he was far better than that. I know he gets that thrown in all the time, but there was just something magical about him. He made the game look absolutely effortless. He was a genius, I think. It's not too big a word to use for him. And he just had that, those beautiful golden locks as well. He was just unique to look at, to watch, the languid way that he batted. A total hero. But I will give a little mention also to Alan Lamb, who what a character Lammy was. And you think everyone remembers the famous 18 off the over, Bruce Reid, but he did it a second time. He did it off Courtney Walsh as well and reduced Courtney Walsh to tears. So in two separate one-day internationals, he scored 18 off the last over to win it for England at a time when that was really not done at all. And just a great character as well. So I know you asked me for one, I've given you two.
That was a two-part question. You've given two answers. Very much too brief. Gary, brief being the operative word. First cricketing hero and most impactful.
Well, my first cricketing hero was Clive Lloyd. I grew up, in Liverpool, but it was very monocultural at that time. In Liverpool, there were long-standing sort of ethnic communities in Toxteth, but outside Liverpool, very little. So Big Clive was in many ways an extraordinary, exotic person as well to look at and to watch him play. And my father absolutely hero worshipped Clive Lloyd as well. So he kind of infected me with it. And he played cricket with such extraordinary grace before he got injured. He was fantastic. Super Cat, he was called in the covers. And of course, as a batsman, he was hard hitting, but he also made the hard, tough runs as well. And I remember my dad saying he had a conversation with someone who said, he's all right, Clive Lloyd, but we could have got Gary Sobers. And my dad said, all right, Sobers is good, but we're not swapping Big Clive for anybody. So Clive Lloyd was my hero. But the most impactful was the person who's probably my second on the list of heroes, and that would be Michael Holding. Because when I was sort of 14, I wanted to be Michael Holding, and now I'm kind of nearly 57. I've grown out of that. Oh no, I haven't. I still want to be Michael Holding. But I mean, Holding, especially in that summer of '76, it gave me something about the appreciation which I still get now of the human body in motion, the extraordinary balance of his run to the crease, the explosion of the action, and then the calmness and the quiet as he finished his action, and his head would go slightly back and he'd walk back to his mark. Everything was about controlled aggression. Everything was about grace. And that gave me an appreciation of football. But in later years, as I've gone into theatre criticism, in particular dance, I've understood how the body moves in spaces on a stage, and how dance can be used to tell stories, and how important balance is and core strength. And it really does go back to watching Michael Holding and understanding that this was something that was different. You know, this was something that was a key to unlocking something about human endeavor. And, you know, Alberto Guantarena was around, the Cuban 800-meter runner, and then Sebastian Coe was a beautiful runner. And, you know, I saw Gower before he played for England, who was so graceful in the field and batting. Mark Waugh. But Holding was the first one who actually showed me what the human body could do. And it would be an exaggeration to say I'm still exploring the aesthetics of that every day, but very, very often I find myself thinking about that particular question, and it was Mikey who definitely introduced me to it.
It's a beautiful paean to the power of the human body and of muscles and ligaments to combine to do the extraordinary. Annie, we started with you, so we'll finish with you. We may have touched on it, but just to sum it up, first cricketing hero and most impactful, longest lasting.
Yeah, I grew up with the strongest West Indian team, sort of just before I knew cricket and while I was growing up. So, and of course the impact they had at Somerset as well. So, there's two. Really hard to choose. I can't really tell which one is my hero and which is the most impactful, but it has to be Joel Garner and it has to be Viv Richards, although there's always there's always Trescothick in my background, but he's later on. So these two West Indians made a huge impact on my life, both of them, and Viv probably is the most heroic to me.
Should we give Viv and Joel equal billing in first, and then the most impactful, give it to Trez?
Go for it. I you know me, I'll say Trez whenever, whatever, however.
I mean, I was shocked to hear Trez not make it. I mean, I really hope he doesn't listen to this, and he's going to be beside himself with despair.
Slighted.
And Gaz, can I just ask you a question about Michael Holding? And it's a slightly leading question, but the finest bowling action in the history of the game?
I would say at his absolute peak when he was 22, 23, and he was slipping himself as he did at the Oval in the iconic Test match. He took 14 wickets on an absolute shirt front. Yes, but Dennis Lilly had such a fantastic action as well, and there are so many ways to deliver that ball. And Annie will be too young to remember, but the Demon of Froome at Somerset, he had the ugliest action. Kevin Jarvis was quite close, I think, at Kent, but I think Colin Dredge, the Demon of Froome, he was the anti-Holding, and it just goes to show how that cricket just does not reduce. I keep finding myself saying this. It doesn't reduce to biomechanics. It doesn't reduce to simple motivations. It doesn't reduce to a kind of recipe book where you can create these towering figures of the game. They just appear, and we cherish them, and then they disappear, and we remember them, and what joy they give when they're around.
Very true. Very true. If I can give you an alternative anti-Holding in terms of aesthetics, Andre Nell.
Oh yes, Gunter. Yeah.
There is, as Gary says, a a joy to be found in watching someone make something very difficult look very difficult, and a humanizing quality to it. But on that really beautiful and affecting note, that's it for this week's Guerilla Cricket podcast. Thank you very much for this week's Origin Story sharers, Annie CHAVE.
Thank you for listening.
Gary NAYLOR.
Thank you, Nakul, for hosting.
And Paul Grubby Howarth.
Joy and a pleasure. Thank you for indulging us.
Thank you, as ever, to our editor and producer, John Stone. Remember, if you sign up as a patron at any donation level at patreon.com/Guerilla Cricket, you get all of our podcasts a day early. So that's this show, our county cricket show, Guerilla Show, hosted by Tony Bishop, and the freewheeling and maybe occasional alternative Guerilla Cricket podcast. Money's an issue, we understand. We would never, ever paywall you out completely. So you can find the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Acast, and Podbean. So please, download, share, subscribe. Those of you who are listening on iTunes in particular, please leave us a review and a 5-star rating so more people can find the show and create their own Guerilla origin stories. On the very day this pod comes out, so Monday the 11th, we'll have Game 3 of our live and interactive dice cricket tournament, the Dickwell Abroad Alzat Trophy, during which, as I mentioned a bit at the top of the show, we're raising money not just for ourselves, but for our friends at the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, who do amazing work combating type 1 diabetes. It's a cause close to our hearts. Type 1 is what robbed us of our beloved friend and colleague, Dan Lucas, 3 and a bit years ago. We can't do our usual annual charity game to help JDRF out. So please donate via our Just Giving page. It's pinned to our Twitter and Facebook pages and in our Instagram bio, and it's in the show notes for this podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, be generous, be considerate, be safe. Bye-bye.